What is good, you guys? This is Steven with All Talk On, and welcome to the arena. Alright, so we're here to address an age-long question slash battle slash fanboy, I don't even know, too many fanboys. But basically what it is that a lot of people tend to say AMD is better for budget, and a lot of people say Intel is better for performance, as well as when it comes to their graphics cards on the AMD and NVIDIA side, which holds some truth. So I can't say this is just, you know, to address a myth, because it does hold some truth. If you want full-on raw power, chances are you're going to have to get an Intel CPU. Granted, you're going to pay out of pocket for it. They are very pricey, but nothing really holds a candle to the performance that they can bring, and that goes for the same as NVIDIA's flagship cards. There really isn't much that AMD has done to, besides like having lower prices. There isn't really much that they have done as far as performance goes in keeping up with that kind of stuff. But that being said, a lot of people think that they can't have the Intel or NVIDIA parts or AMD equivalents of without spending a lot of extra money. Now, this is not necessarily true. Behind me we have two computers. We have, in the red corner, we have a full AMD build, and in the blue corner, and as you can see they're both lit up, we have an Intel slash NVIDIA build. So we'll go through a parts list for the first things first, I guess. So the AMD side, we have an FX 6300 on a gigabyte 970 AUD3P motherboard, full ATX motherboard. We have 8 gigs of Team Elite memory that was purchased at 1600 but has been overclocked to 1866, and the original latencies on it were 11, 11, 11, but I had lowered them down to 10, 11, 10 and bumped it up to 1866, and it's holding up just fine. We have in both systems a 120 gig SSD by AData, and we have a Seagate Barracuda 1 terabyte and an MSI R9 270X, along with this having a 600 watt EVGA 80 plus bronze power supply. Now, I know that in the performance test video I had put the parts list at the bottom and it said EVGA 500 watt 80 plus certified in general, but that was because I had just gotten the power supply today, and as well as the case, I've been waiting for these parts. So those were done with a different power supply. I had originally ordered the 600 watt bronze for this because it was the same price as the regular 80 plus 500 watt, due to it being a refurbished model, which it works just fine, pulls 400 watts from the wall without an issue. Now, the Intel side, we have a Intel Core i3 4170 at 3.7 gigahertz, a gigabyte GA H81M micro ATX motherboard, 8 gigs of Team Dark memory. So this isn't the Team Elite, but it's Team Dark. It looks cooler. It's DDR 1600 megahertz with 99924.1 on the latencies, and it's also got a 128 gig, sorry, AData Premier SSD, as well as a Seagate Barracuda 1 terabyte, as you could guess, as well as a GTX 760 by Gigabyte, the revision 2.0, so it's the windforce with the 3 fans and all, and I think the windforce one, the revision 2, had the 8-pin plus 6-pin, which this one does have because it's the 3-fan model, so it's, you know, it's a big long one. And of course we have an EVGA 500 watt 80 plus power supply in there. So the cases, obviously you can see this is the DIY N8, the white version of it. I chose this case because it's cheap, and it comes with 2 blue LED fans, which is exactly what I needed, and fits this build really perfectly. And honestly, I think it's sporting the Intel colors very well. And then on the AMD side, we have a raidmax Vortex 4, which is the red version, with a red cold cathode at the top to obviously sport more AMD colors. And once again, this case I think fits the AMD budget side very well, with the nice red accents and the more aggressive kind of I guess just aggressive look in general, while the Intel's kind of keeping its, I don't know, kind of cool little curvy shape. So those are the overall PCs, and if you can guess it, all these parts are aimed to compete with each other. Obviously the motherboard, the 970 is a lot better than the H81 by Gigabyte, but I was able to get a refurbished 970 for very cheap, and I was planning to buy a 970 anyways. And the Intel Core i3, all we needed was 2 SATA 6 gigabit per second ports for the SSD and the hard drive. as well as, you know, a PCI Express lane. Gen 2 works just fine with the 760, and you know, I didn't need all the crazy features, so there was no real need to spend any extra money on that motherboard. But as for the 970, it's always nice to have that to overclock. Now, if you guys have watched the performance test already, those were all done at stock speeds. There was no overclocking on the FX 6300 whatsoever. There definitely could have been. If you guys saw the temperatures were only hitting in the 40s in this, the low 40s. And that is because it's got an FX 8320 cooler on it, which is a decent amount beefier than the standard cooler that came with the processor. It has a bigger copper base plate, as well as 2 large copper heat pipes to basically help dissipate heat. And the i3 as well has a cooler from an i7 4790K, 4770K, the i5s, and or the Pentium Anniversary all have different coolers, believe it or not. They look exactly the same, but once you flip it over, you'll notice there's a copper base plate on the bottom for better heat dissipation, and that is why I used it on this. But even then, the temperatures were still a little higher than I thought they would have been, comparing them to the i3 4130s that I've messed around with, and even some of the i5s. But I mean, I guess maybe because it's clocked at 3.7 gigahertz, it's going to get more toastier. But either way, the prices for these computers matched up seriously close. Like, I mean, within, I didn't do exact math, but it was within about $5 to $10 of each other, which is pretty intense. And I think the AMD one cost a little bit more, but that is because, for instance, the AMD motherboard was a little bit more expensive. It was a refurbished model, and a lot cheaper than I normally would have paid, but it was still about $10 to $15 more expensive than buying the Gigabyte motherboard H81 one for the Intel side. But the Intel Core i3 was a little bit more expensive. I bought it at Fry's Electronics for $80, which is a great price. But the FX 6300 I was able to find on Craigslist for $60. So that knocked off an extra 20 bucks. Now, the GTX 760 I picked up off a guy off Craigslist for $100, and the MSI R9 270X came from eBay for $120. So there we have the AMD side taking a little bit more money in for that. And I know that the RAM, I think, was about $3 more for the AMD side. For some reason, it's just sales of RAM. But overall, the prices lined up ridiculously close, as well as I threw in the $7 for the cold cathode in there, obviously. Alright, so all the pricing and parts set aside, it's probably about time we take a look at our performance and see overall which one is better. And honestly, I think you guys will be a little bit surprised, and we'll come back to a conclusion after that. So after taking a look at the scores, it's probably looking like the Intel system is winning. But if you actually sat there and paused and took a look at all the graphs, you'd realize that that's not necessarily true. So one of the main things is if we look at our 3D Firestrike score, we can see that the GPU is, for the most part, better. The 760 is beating out the R9 270X. But obviously, these synthetic benchmarks don't really mean too much when it comes to actual performance. But if we do take a look at it, the CPU, the FX 6300, is pushing out a good, a little bit ahead of the Intel i3. So that's probably due to the fact that it's got more cores. Though, honestly, when I was watching the testing, the frame rate was basically the same. It was still edging it out, I guess, in some way, shape, or form. And you'll see that happening as we go through some more of the scores. So if you guys also took a look at the benchmarks for Call of Duty, you'll also notice that the AMD system pulled ahead in the maximum frame rate, as well as pulled ahead in the minimum frame rate, which means a lot better when it doesn't dip as low. But I will say this, they had the exact same frame rate for average frames. The only difference was in the AMD side went a little bit higher and dropped a little bit less. And that's probably due to having more than 2 cores to use, or 4 threads using its hyper-threading. But sometimes games really like the 4 physical cores, regardless of how strong the GPU is. And we can definitely see that happening in the GTA benchmark. And by taking a look at the score in here, it outperforms it in both minimum, maximum, or all 3, minimum, maximum, and average frame rate in GTA, with technically what the Firestrike score is saying is a less performing graphics card. So they're trading blows back and forth. Another one I guess we can talk about real quick before we move on is Dying Light. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but a lot of people would think that the Intel one beat it. But once again, minimum and average frame rate are higher on the AMD side, opposing to the Intel did get a higher maximum frame rate, but its averages and its minimum frame rate was lower than the AMD build. So once again, it's like, you would think the Intel was winning, but then at the same time, now it looks like the AMD is winning. But that's not also true either, as we can see in our scores from, I think it was Tomb Raider, the Intel one just crushes it. And that's probably due to the fact that Tomb Raider is not really favorable of CPU performance when it comes to having more cores. It's going to want more GPU horsepower. So it's going to take more advantage of having a 760 and an i3 with only 2 cores and 2 theoretical cores added, compared to having the 6 cores of the AMD, which honestly it probably would only use 4 of them, and a weaker graphics card like the 270X. So they're trading blows literally 1 for 1 back and forth. So it comes down to the decision which one is better. And my honest opinion right now would be whichever one's cheaper, but they cost the same price. So that leaves it to one thing, and that would be the games you like to play. Now obviously, if you're playing any older games, it's really not going to matter. But when you're looking at games like GTA and Dying Light and Call of Duty, those are like somewhat newer titles compared to the other titles like Tomb Raider, and even stuff like if you want to play Counter-Strike Go, League of Legends. The Intel build would be a better way to go with the stronger GPU and way stronger 2 cores compared, core per core performance. Now, that being said, it's still up to you. What type of games do you play? Do you want the one that's going to have better performance in games that would utilize, 4, 6 cores if it can, like GTA or Battlefield? Or would you want something that's going to give you better performance in lower end games, like maybe for, say, Counter-Strike Go, Black Mesa, or something along the lines of that? Now, the decision is yours to make, and honestly, you guys can overall choose the winner. I don't really care. I like them both. I have an Intel in my system. I started out with an AMD, and it really doesn't bother me. They both perform and both have their places in this world. I was very surprised, though, that I was able to put both of them together for around the same price. Even brand new, these computers match up fairly well. Obviously, I'm going to put the links in the description for all the parts list, but pay no attention to the price. For some reason, Amazon has an MSI 270X for $400. I have no clue why, but that's what it's showing up, and the GTX 760 isn't even showing up with the price. So pay no attention to those, but if you were to actually hunt down all of these parts brand new, the prices would line up pretty close. It's actually very surprising. So both of these computers are within reach around the $500 budget range. It's just up to you to decide. Obviously, we have expandability with being able to put a Core i7, Core i5 in there, but then we also have the expandability for this one, because it's got its full ATX motherboard with 4 slots, which yes, this one could have had 2. But the FX 6300 is a very good way to go too. If you never expect to get yourself a 980 Ti or even, you know, something big and crazy like a 970, it's not going to hold you back. I would even argue that it wouldn't even hold a 970 back too much, but you would see a performance gain by having a stronger CPU with a stronger GPU. It's just how it works. Not necessarily that it's bottlenecking it though, but that's definitely something you'd want to take a look at. So obviously the decision is up to you guys. Overall, I hope you guys liked it. Basically, I don't even know what to name this video, AMD versus Intel, something like that. Anything?